Buenos días, buenas tardes, y buenas noches, bonjour, bonsoir, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you may be. Jay Slater Case. A while ago, I featured some of the prophetic words of a detective called Graham Whetton. I can't remember if I did a video or community post on it, but yeah, Graham Whetton came out with some great insight very, very early doors in the Jay Slater case, asking questions like Jay's bank account activity should be looked at, any connections to crime scene in Lancashire looked at. And this, of course, Graham Whetton said all this before Jay's body was found and all the rest of it. But of course, Graham Whetton's words went unheeded. The powers that be on Tenerife decided they knew what they were doing. And so that whole detective approach, it seemed to me, was abandoned. I want to feature the words of three other detectives in just a second, but I want to point out, first of all, something that we've been told over and over again in the Jay Slater case, but something I've seen no evidence whatsoever. I've seen no evidence of it at all. And that is, we were told over and over again that a parallel investigation was happening while the search was happening for Jay Slater. This is what we were told. We were told repeatedly no hypotheses were removed from the table, all options were being looked at. Um, but I really don't understand how that works because once a case is settled on as a missing persons case, there is nothing to investigate. And this is why the powers that be, the authorities in Tenerife, established, I mean, it was an awful mistake, established a contradiction. If they have declared this as a missing person case, there is simply nothing to investigate. That's it. You just search for the missing person. But if it's declared crime, a potential crime, or heavens above, potential murder, homicide, then of course a parallel investigation is to open up. So what I'm saying is we we don't see any evidence at all there was any investigation. In fact, we see plenty of evidence that there was no investigation until it was way too late. For example, we all know the name of Cipriano Martin, head of the Mountain Rescue Division of the Guardia Civil. Now, head of the Mountain Rescue Division means the guy knows about mountains, rescuing people. The guy has no idea about detective work. And so the fact we know his name and we knew it from day one, but no one out there can ever tell us the name of the detective inspector that was leading the investigation into what happened to Jay Slater. And the reason I submit we don't know that person's name is because he or she never existed. We were given these crumbs of there's a parallel investigation. I don't believe there ever was. And my evidence for that is when you have a forensics team going into the Airbnb on day 16, not day one, day 16, yeah, 15 days too late, that tells you there was never any investigation. So I want to highlight the words of three detectives, Peter Blexley, Mike Neville, and I really want to focus on this guy here, Steve Gaskin, because he really wasn't mentioned a whole lot in the Jay Slater case. And when I go through some of his words, I think you'll understand that Steve Gaskin, really did hit the nail on the head in so many instances. The reason we do need to focus on what detectives said is because no one in the Jay Slater commentary, if you like, commentary world, foul play group, accident group, none of us are detectives. And yet, for example, we had the searchers, notably Chris Pennington, announce that to the world. You know, Chris is out there saying, I'm no detective. Well, given Chris is no detective, but he's out there trying to find Jay Slater, wouldn't you have thought that a searcher would take on the words of a detective? Yeah? Absorb that wisdom and act upon it. But the curious thing that happened in the Jay Slater case is we had the Chris Penningtons of this world saying, well, I'm no detective, and then deciding to ignore all the words of the detectives and blunder on searching as if, well, what would the detectives know? Chris Pennington has no idea, none at all, why Jay walked up that hill. And he has no idea why Jay left that road. And he has no idea where Jay went or what he did. None. A detective might, had Chris Pennington consulted a detective, have given him some insights. But what I find strange about the Jay Slater case is those that declared they are not detectives then decided they would ignore the words of detectives that could have helped them. Before we get to Steve Gaskin, let's go back to good old Peter Bleksley. He had a lot to say on the matter, mainly on GB News, I believe. Here's one of his quotes. Peter Bleksley said, "We do not know where those other lines of inquiry are." And that gets back to my point that we were told by the Guardia Civil that it wasn't just, searching for Jay, there were other lines of inquiry. And Peter Bleksley wisely said, but we don't know where those other lines of inquiry are. Left completely in the dark. And that's a big mistake. That's a massive mistake because while the public have no idea what is being looked at in the parallel inquiry, then the family, I would submit, general public, all those concerned, the searchers, they too would have had absolutely no idea what was happening in this parallel inquiry. And that could well have guided, I would have thought, their whole approach. If you know in a parallel inquiry that some information has been found that implies the guy didn't ever go there, well, that might dissuade you somewhat from blundering through the V notch and up into the gates of hell and what have you, because the detectives have come across something else. So again, Peter Bleksley, right. If we don't know where those other lines of inquiry are going, then it's not helpful. Also, Peter Bleksley, the last people to have seen Jay should have been completely bottomed out. And it was a grotesque error not to do so. Now, I take Peter Bleksley's phrase bottomed out to mean interrogated over the 3 days allowed for interrogation after arrest before charges are made or release is recommended. 72 hours to hold Ayub Abdul Qasim and Stephen Fortes Rocas. Well, and all of them, Lucy May Gregory Law. But again, the last people, said Peter Bleksley, the last people to have seen Jay should have been completely bottomed out, and it was a grotesque error not to do so. Of course it was. Of course it was. To put all your eggs in one basket and say this is a missing person case and fail to, as Peter says, bottom out those last people to see Jay. Enormous mistake. Grotesque error. I think I like that phrase. I'm going to keep that one in mind. Grotesque error. And we'll finish with Peter Bleksley's comment. Some of the armchair detectives raised questions that are quite valid. Well, I would add, Peter, that some of the armchair detectives are still raising questions that are quite valid. Now, if anyone in the accident group disagrees with Peter Bleksley, then it would be useful for any of them, any of the accident group, to give an example of a question that has been raised by armchair detectives that is not valid, and contrast that with a question raised by armchair detectives that is valid. Because again, we have this grey area. Peter Bleksley never had the time on GB News to go into examples of questions that are raised by armchair detectives that are not valid and those that are valid. But this is key, because as the commenters, as the sleuths, as the armchair detectives get criticized over and over again, we never get told which questions raised are valid and which aren't. Now, it may be the action group think all questions raised by armchair detectives are invalid. They might disagree with Peter Blexley. But then again, none of them are detectives. So where does their expertise come into this? Let us switch quickly to Mike Neville before we get on to good old Steve Gaskin. Mike Neville said regarding Jay, he's gone missing in that, in the golden hour, everything was placed in that he's gone missing in that terrain idea. And when Mike Neville says the golden hour, you hear this phrase, the golden hour, a lot. It's usually the golden 24 hours, the golden day, if you like, but it's called the golden hour. That time span when if you don't get all of the, especially the forensic information nailed down, the chances are you're not going to find out enough to, bring charges, prosecute, get convictions, etc. The golden hour, but it's the golden 24 hours. Yeah, and of course, this is, to quote Blexley, the grotesque error. Mike Neville is right. In the golden hour, everything was placed in that he's gone missing in that terrain idea. And as soon as everything is geared towards he must have gone missing in this terrain, and I assume that was based on the words of Lucy and the friends, the so-called friends, you've got to understand that all they had to do, these friends of Jay, was to make sure that the whole case was missing person, missing person, missing person for the first 24 hours. And after that, after the end of the golden hour, there ain't going to be a proper investigation that finds anything out. In this narrow window of opportunity, this is why I believe the friends of Jay and those involved in his demise were given some very accurate and very good information, in a sense, from whatever big cheese is controlling them here. I mean, there is a big cheese controlling them. Lucy has a boss. Ayub has a boss. They all have someone over them. And that person, I think, realized early doors that if this just for 24 hours, I mean, 48 hours better, 76 hours even better, 2 weeks, perfect. If we can keep the mystery men out of the focus for 10 days or so, fantastic. So the big cheese knows this. We just need, especially those first 24 hours, to be spent looking for Jay and nothing else. No forensics. And that's job done. And that's what happened. One more time, Mike Neville, in the golden hour, everything was placed in that he's gone missing in that terrain idea. And Mike, I think, is hinting there that that's where it all went wrong. Now we turn to Steve Gaskin, and this is what he said. I think I've got two quotes from him. Steve Gaskin said, when Jay's missing persons report came to the police, or came into the police hands, he, Steve Gaskin, if he were in charge of this, Steve Gaskin, he would have immediately decided, or he would immediately have to decide. It's that compulsion. If you are the supervising detective inspector, the SDI, he would immediately have to decide to either treat it as a missing persons inquiry or a murder case. And this, again, is something that so many people find hard to grasp. This is an instant decision that can lead to disaster or to resolution. Once again, Steve Gaskin said, as if he were that person that had to decide, he would have to immediately decide. Immediately. Lucy's made her report. It's either or. Missing persons inquiry or a murder case. Deciding that it's a murder case means a lot of resources. Officers are pulled off other work and directed towards a murder case when they are not in a missing persons case. Missing persons case is exactly searching for the missing person. So volunteers are called for, mountain rescue division are called in, not the detectives, etc., etc. And Steve Gaskin, of course, is exactly right. What happened was murder case was not declared, missing persons inquiry, and so a relatively small number of trained police officers were involved. That's why you see the bomberos, the firefighters. That's why you see the volunteers. That's why you see the people that you see up there. It is all geared towards searching and the missing person case. Nothing, from what I see, nothing at all. You've got this mountain rescue guy that is the spokesman. Nothing at all has been set up to find out what actually happened to Jay. It's all about finding him. Um, Sorry, I interrupted what Steve Gaskin said. He also said if he wasn't sure, yeah, if he wasn't sure about missing person or murder case, he'd always opt to treat it as a murder because of the golden 24 hours to gather forensic evidence. And this is very much how it works. If you've declared it murder case and you go ahead and get all that forensic evidence that you possibly can in the first 24 hours, once that evidence is examined, you can always step back and say, we've looked at the evidence, we've interrogated or interviewed the witnesses, suspects. It now looks like it is a missing persons case. You can always step back from that murder case starting point. What you can't do is start with missing person case and then build up much later to, oh, now let's look at the possibility of foul play. You can't do it. It's too late. So once again, we have to decide, did the Guardia Civil do all of this, what appears to be so incompetently, all of this missing person case so incompetently? Is it just that? Is it an inability to do the right thing in police work? Or was there someone that said, for whatever reason, this case must be missing person and only missing person? If at any later stage we decide to make it look like we're investigating, so be it. And that is my worry with this. My worry with this is it seems like, because we have so many detectives in the UK that they're all in agreement. There is not one senior detective that has commented on the Jay Slater cases, has come out and said, oh, the accident group are correct. It must and could only have been an accident. There was never any need to look into foul play. None of them have said that. They've all said completely the opposite. Completely the opposite. So all the people that say they're not a detective, they don't know anything about detective work. They've heard what the detectives have said. Then they're all saying, well, all the detectives are wrong. But those UK detectives have all said this. And so what is the conclusion? The conclusion is either Spanish policing, Tenerife policing, is so awful they can't figure out the right way to do this, or I would suggest much more likely someone high up said, this is a missing person case and that's the end of it. And they might have had good reason to say that. We don't know. But in the search for answers to the Jay Slater case, because the golden hour or the golden hours disappeared, went up in smoke, it may be that we never have the answers that we keep insisting are out there. But we will see. We will see. All right, let's leave it there. I will say thank you for your prophetic words, Steve Gaskin, Mike Neville, Peter Blexley, and who was the other one? Gaskin, Neville, Blexley, Graham Wetton, who I mentioned a few weeks ago. Okay, a lot more to come today, I hope. It is Tuesday, 28th of April. I will say hasta luego, adios, and see you next time.